This is Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline, solving the climate crisis while increasing profits in your business. Here's Frank.
Welcome back to another episode of Decarbonize the World. In pursuit of a fossil fuel-free electrical system, we are diving deep into the potential of offshore wind power. Joining us is Jennifer Garvey, the head of New York market strategy for Ørsted, a Danish energy company at the forefront of this clean energy revolution. Jennifer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Frank. It's terrific to be here.
Jennifer, let's start with the basics. How many homes is the South Fork Wind Project expected to power in East Hampton?
So South Fork Wind, which consists of only 12 turbines, will ultimately power about 70,000 homes once it's operational later this year.
Mm-hmm. What are the expected benefits of reducing reliance on fossil fuels for electricity generation?
Countless, right? I mean, here we are in pursuit of cleaner air and looking for solutions to fend off our climate crisis. But there's obviously connecting clean power to the grid from offshore wind will allow existing generators that currently work off of fossil fuels to run less. We'll have the ability to, capture the incredible offshore wind that exists off our shores here in New York along the east end of Long Island. They're known to be strong, quite strong and steady. And so it's an awfully consistent form of renewable energy that can run through the night. We're not, tied to the sun, obviously, and just a great way to support our grid during peak times.
When I speak to people, they tell me that, they ask me the question, how is it to look at the windmills themselves? And, I tell them that the wind farm is 30 miles offshore and nobody from the East End here will be able to see them. Isn't that true?
That is true. In fact, some people have asked me if our turbines are finished because they see a couple of the turbines off of Block Island, which, as you know, that's the nation's very first offshore wind farm. 5 turbines located off of Block Island, and you can see them from Montauk. They're about 14 miles. They look really tiny on the horizon, but once South Fork's finished, figure it's roughly 14 miles to Block Island. It'd be, more than twice the distance to get to South Fork from Montauk. So they're really far out there. You won't be able to see them. And certainly not from the landing location, where the cable comes ashore in Wainscott, which is, another 20 miles from Montauk. So very far away, out of sight.
Cool.
In talking with people from Block Island, sometimes I've heard that it's almost an opportunity miss that a lot of people really like looking at the turbines, and it's been a real source of tourism and interest on Block Island. So I guess its beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Actually, they also have sightseeing tours from Montauk to those wind farms because people are really interested.
Yeah, fishing tours too.
How many jobs are estimated to be created in New York due to offshore wind development?
Oh, for offshore wind development, the number is tremendous. Tens of thousands of jobs, to support the industry over the full build out of the market that is anticipated in New York. For context, New York does have one of the largest offshore wind markets in the nation. It was an early leader in offshore wind. Right now the goal is set at 9 gigawatts by 2035. There's a bill actually that was moving through the legislature the other day that, seeking to boost that goal. I'm sure it won't be long before the goal does increase, regardless of how it gets there, because offshore wind is such a good fit for this area because we have this, tremendous offshore wind resource right off our shores, and it's really a critical mix in the Northeast. We essentially cannot meet our clean energy goals without offshore wind here in the Northeast. So New York has a big goal. So neighboring states have goals. New Jersey has a big offshore wind goal. Offshore wind is definitely a big part of our future. And it's, excitement both, of course, about the clean energy benefits, but also about the enormous opportunity it can create.
Great. You recently said the completion of South Fork Wind's onshore cable installation marks an important milestone for this historic project. Can you tell me about that and what else is going on?
Sure. So the onshore portion, it really just entails setting a transmission cable underneath the ground. Just to explain what we did for South Fork. There's the big picture, you need to bring power from that will be generated by these turbines, which, as we've talked about, are many miles from the point of the grid where this power needs to connect, and you have to find a way to bring it to a substation that is part of the existing grid. So in the case of South Fork Wind, we have to bring the power to a particular substation in East Hampton. And we had to find a path for that to go from a siting perspective. And so ultimately, we came up with a route that brings a submarine cable ashore underneath a beach known as Wainscott Beach in the town of East Hampton. And then it follows a route on shore for about 4 miles underneath existing publicly owned rights-of-way. We're underneath town roads, and we're in the railroad corridor for about 2 miles. So, the objective is to find the path that is the least impactful to the environment, to the community. And there's a big permitting process that we have to go through to demonstrate that we have found that least impactful route. And so ultimately, now that that process is complete, we've been able to, all of that infrastructure is installed underground. So you really, there's no real visible evidence that we've been there except for freshly repaved roads
Right.
and manhole covers. Yeah. And so, and just with respect to the way that we install the cable under the beach, because this can be a flashpoint, but we use this process called horizontal directional drilling, which is
Right.
a very precise way of drilling. It's essentially a smart drill bit that you can use to tunnel very deep underneath the beach and under the nearshore area. So the full length of that horizontal directional drill for South Fork Wind is about 2,500 feet, and it goes to a depth of about 80 feet underneath the beach, and it exits about a third of a mile from shore. So the whole point is just to make sure that that is protected from erosion over the course of time. And so we feel very, very, very confident that that cable will not be unearthed. Certainly at that beach location, we have a lot more to worry about if that ever happens. But the work is done, and so there's a temporary construction presence to make all of that installation happen. It's very similar to work that you would see onshore all the time, because we're constantly installing infrastructure underground. We're no stranger to that type of work. But that work now is done for South Fork to set the cable, and the cable's been laid out to the wind farm area at this point. And so, it's just been a great milestone for the project. The community has thought about this project for a long time and heard about, what the construction would look like, and now endured it, and it's over and everything looks good as new.
I remember the opposition and the hysteria about, all this work that you were planning to do, on shore to bring the cable in. And, I travel every day. I travel the roads, Wainscott Northwest Road and Daniels Hole Road. And, you guys did a great job. There was very little disturbance at all to traffic. And it was very clean. And like you said, now that it's all done, it was done in the winter months too. So there was, when we have less traffic. So I saw it being very efficient and very well done.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, that was certainly what we were striving for. And, we go through, as I mentioned, a really long permitting process in order to
Hmm.
come up with the conditions that will be imposed on the project as during construction. And that's really the intent of the permitting process, is to make sure that when we do work, we are reflecting input from the community. East Hampton is it's a place that people enjoy all year round, to be clear, but it gets a lot busier in the summer, of course. And so we had a lot of time of year restrictions. We weren't allowed to work during those peak summer months when there's just a much greater influx of people and people coming out to enjoy their seasonal residences and that. So we can be really responsive to community concerns in the permitting process, and just in talking with the community. As a developer, you want to be responsive to the community. We certainly did.
Right.
And so those are all the conditions that we came up to try and make it as easy on the residents as possible.
And it was pretty easy. As the first offshore wind farm in New York State, South Fork Wind broke new ground and set precedents for future projects on the East Coast. I believe there were 26 agencies Ørsted needed to obtain approvals from. What was your experience like in retrospect to getting all of these approvals?
Well, it's a lengthy process. It's a very
Yeah.
robust process. You're right. I mean, about 26 approvals. It's You go through two major permitting frameworks, one at the federal level, one at the state level, and baked into that are consultations with many different agencies, and certainly at the state and at the local level, we even have to go to the very local town governments. We have the town of East Hampton. There's this unique body known as the trustees in East Hampton that have jurisdiction over the beach, and so it's a very long list of approvals to obtain. Everyone has a chance to weigh in. Really, it's a very permissive process in that way. There's a lot of opportunities for input. We're also, South Fork is one of the first projects, the offshore wind projects. This will be it's a utility scale project. It'll be the first utility scale project in the nation to be completed. And so we were really at, the forefront of going through the permitting process together with BOEM and these other agencies. I know we've talked about Block Island Wind Farm as being the nation's first offshore wind farm, but it was built in Rhode Island state water. So it didn't have the same it didn't go through that same federal process that we have to go through for South Fork
Okay.
and for future offshore wind projects. But it's a lot of talking. It's a lot of learning, on both sides. We're learning from the agencies, they're learning from us. Everyone's like talking through what needs to happen, when it needs to happen. It's so much about coordination and understanding timelines, and then navigating within the frameworks of the policies and regulatory frameworks that exist already, and then sometimes they need to change, or we learn that they should change in time. But it's an extraordinary process. It's quite complex. There's a lot of people who help us along the way. We have an incredibly talented permitting team. We have consultants that help us and support us. There's a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of reports and analyses to turn out. But the point is, it's a robust process. Everyone's taking a hard look at this. Everyone's looking out for the environment and all of this, and making sure that everything's being cited responsibly, that we're creating opportunities for stakeholders to weigh in so that we can be mindful of all the ways that we could affect an area or a stakeholder group. So it's also designed to withstand opposition to a certain extent too. I mean, the thinking is, if we put a lot of work into the permitting process, and we develop a very strong record, so that if you do endure litigation over time, if someone decides they don't like your project for whatever reason, you still have the ability to move it forward even while considering that litigation.
Yeah. Especially here in East Hampton, we have two governing boards. Most people wouldn't understand this, but we have the trustees, which are elected, and they were elected as a result of what's called a Dogon patent, from the King of England. They control the wetlands and bottomlands, and then you have the town board. So there was a lot of negotiation, I recall, that was happening between just these two governing boards here, and getting them to agree on a lot of the aspects of the approval process.
Yes, there was. I mean, there was a lot of negotiations about all of this, but whenever something feels new and folks need to align, it takes time, and there's a lot of information that has to be shared. I think that's just a fairly natural process, particularly when you're dealing with offshore wind. Of course, is not new. I mean, the industry's been around for about 30 years now, but because it was the first project in New York, and a new encounter for the town, for example, it was a lot to consider for them, and so it just took time to talk it through and work it all out. They've been wonderfully supportive, and we really thank them for the time they put into understanding the project and to working so closely with us.
Right. I want to get to the significant opposition you faced from the project, but we have to stop here. Coming up in the second part of my conversation with Jennifer Garvey, the head of New York market strategy at Ørsted, Jennifer shares what she hopes the legacy of their South Fork wind project will be.
I want this to be a success story that supports other projects going forward. And so that's what I hope we'll be able to say at the end of all of this.
This has been Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline. To connect with Frank and to learn more about clean energy, reducing fossil fuels, and increasing profits, go to frankdeline.com. Decarbonize the World is a production of Advantage Audio.